Good evening, everybody. Let me try it again. I guess I gave a week. How you doing? So, how many of you were here yesterday for the marathon? Good. Very good. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming back. So, tonight, on behalf of HBCU Green Fund, Donors of Color Network, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce the Puerto Rican rock star, our very own. Sister's badass, right? She got the shoes to go with it. She usually has her bag, no telling what's in it, right? But and moves in so many circles. So whatever you may see of her here in New York, in Colombia, I can tell you, I have traveled with this woman around the world, and she is bad everywhere she goes. And everybody knows Asatis Rodriguez Centron, and she will teach me how to roll my tongue eventually, but all of this activity, she is the center. She causes that centrifugal force that brings us all swirling around. And I am so honored. I am so excited to learn this evening. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Asatis, our very own star.
All right, I'm so excited tonight because we're talking about climate reparations. And I think it's an important topic because we have moved in different ways in the climate negotiations, but somehow it is not enough to where we are right now. I'm going to start with we want to start now in like a very high note and energized. We have a full program today in which we will have panelists talk about like their experience, talk about like different mechanisms to make reparations happen. And then we're gonna look around and see, what are some examples of other reparations framework that could be. And then all of you are going to help us create a framework or start creating a framework for a climate reparation. So I'm very happy to welcome you. So we will go into breakout groups and then come back and then figure it out like next steps. This is a conversation that has been ongoing with different communities around the world. But we need to, keep going and then make sure that we have a robust way that our communities can get the reparations they need. So we're going to start with a performance. DJ Cave M is going to, entertain us. And I'm so glad that he's here, so welcome. And then we'll go to a panel.
Peace, peace. Yo, thank you for having me. Very grateful to be here. Shout out to all the ancestors and the elders. Thank you for the opportunity. And I guess, let's just get it started, just on the vibration, because I know it's the evening. But let's go ahead and roll it. We up? We can get it ready. So, I'm an environmental hip-hop artist, activist, producer. So I'm gonna show you how I get down. I go into the schools, and I teach them how to grow. Put a learner garden up in every school, drop 100 down real quick. I done made the seeds all around, watching me water that cabbage like. Keep it 100, keep it 100, keep it 100, keep it 100, keep it 100. Keep it 100, keep it 100. I'ma keep it 100, keep it 100. Yeah, keep it 100. Keep it 100 like this, like keep it 100. Real talk, real quick. Let me show you how to do this real quick. Smooth the game, smooth the game. Yeah, I'm in love with my juicer, packing my lunch in my cooler. Head of the class in my scooter, mauling the gardens a ruler. Your teacher passed me the seeds, man. Hold up, wait, cooler. Growing the food that I eat, yeah, like killing arugula. Hey, Hey, I'ma keep it 100. Keep it 100. What? Keep it 100 like stack. C's like packets and packets and packets of C's. Yeah, I got packets and packets and packets of C's. Licking the hoods, what you missing? Chopping the beats in the kitchen. Skin looking good, what you sipping? Green juice dripping. Big green stepping. Got garden on swole. Gotta stay focused. Watching the earth on the flow like yeah. We gon' keep it 100. Keep it 100. Teaching the youth, we keep it 100 like stacks. Tell them, packets and packets and packets of C's. Yeah, I got packets and packets and packets of C's. So we going to the schools like this, hold on. Put a learning garden up in every school, drop 100 down real quick. I done put a seed up in the ground, watching me water that cabbage like, keep it 100 in the CO. Students be eating so good though, planting the seed in the youth grow. Irrigation for that water flow. When the fall come, I'ma rake up, put the compost down, stack season, grow more food with the teacher, my learning garden's a ruler, you teach your boss for the seeds, man. Hold up, wait, cool up. What? Growing the food that I eat, yeah, like kale and arugula. Yeah, keep it 100, keep it 100, 100, keep it 100, like, yeah, what? Stackers and packets and packets of C's, what? I got packets and packets and packets of C's. So chill, like, keep it 100, keep it 100. In the schools, like, keep it 100, like stacks, yo. Packets and packets and packets of C's. I got packets and packets and packets of C's. So the whole goal is going to the schools, transform by teaching the ideas of culinary climate action, right? Using hip hop as a tool to talk about agronomy, urban forestry, how to go into actually harvest and farm food to table. These are the conversations that are basically battling the ideas of what people want to say we living in a food desert or food, slum or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, we keeping it in. Shout out to my OG, West Side all day, Ron Philly in the house. You know what I'm saying? That's my peoples. And I'm going to do one more song so you can get an idea of how we continue to transform. Coming from where I come from, born in Denver, but now I live on the Wild Wild West, you know what I'm saying? So I put a little more time on this. Hey, yo, homie, turn up the sound for it real quick.
The eating habits of a nation. From the people who brought you Deep Rock and the Teacher's Lounge and the producers of Going Green Living Bling comes a holistic health extravaganza. This fall, an OG from the hood, a gang of gardens, and 5 garden hoes join forces to cultivate the earth.
Yep. Yeah. All right, check this real quick. Yo. Hey, yo, turn my mic up real quick. Yo. Hey, yo, shout out to my homie Cody Chestnut on the song with me. Yo. Yeah. Hey, everybody, put your hands up like this. One hand up like this. Yo. Yeah. Yo. What? Yo. So cool. Yeah. Keep it up like this, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Wow. Go like this. Question, maybe you can help me find direction. I'm a DJ in your town, looking for direction by the fact the produce section. Can I get more? On the way to school, walking by the prison door. +2 liquor stores in a dog park. Talk about the eyesoles when the poles park. And have you ever seen a collard green when they grow up? Show enough. Now why they murder King? No, because they scared of a brother knows how to grow. Plus you got the hip-hop dress, no process. Only eat that vegan food I digest. Deeper than a subway, see me in the underground, living in the earth ship, living off my urban sound. Keep it fresh, you maintain. Everywhere I grow, see things ain't the same. Everywhere I grow, things ain't the same. I tell them, yo, you got to be the change. Change. What? It ain't always gonna be the same. You got to be the change. Yo, tell the truth to the youth. Keep your head high and the struggle don't fall out. Keep your health tight, be ready to ball out. Speak to move now. You gotta maintain, this ain't the same now. Tap you still up the drink, it ain't the same now. Natural gas in your water make your faucet flame out. You want that change now? You want that change now. Hotter than the sun's core, drilling for the oil, fracking at the earth's core. Good thing we all stood up to that Keystone mess. Grow a garden with stress, echinacea, and Russian sage for open longer on that raw food diet. Have you checked the price of cancer? Maybe you should try it. I'm from the old school, that's what them elders say. Mentally free, still eating like slavery. Digitally, trying to see that 2020 and beyond. Peace.
Okay, mama. We saw each other at Pioneers. Thank you so much for that. So today we come together as communities, as scholars, we come together as activists to talk about this very important topic. We know that reparations in climate is not something that is often talked about, or is often talked about, but not enough, and we don't have a specific legal institution or legal framework for it. So today I want to start with a very important panel of people that can talk to their experiences and try to start having that conversation, because often, like we talk about climate impacts, but I think it's important that in this topic of reparations, we cannot talk about reparations without avoiding the do no harm. So that's normally when we talk with communities where they start, it's like, maybe don't do the harm, right? Like maybe let's start there. But unfortunately, we are in a reality where harm is actually happening at this moment. And it's a very heavy topic when you're talking about trauma that is currently happening. So with that recognition is the recognition is the context that we're having that conversation today. So I will be joined in the stage for this panel with Casey Cam Hordinek. Welcome. And Casey Cam Hordinek, thank you. It's a councilwoman and hereditary drum keeper of the Women's Scalp Dance Society of the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. It's a longtime activist. Environmentalist, actress, and published author. And we're very, very happy to have her here. Welcome. And our next is Abhishek Shrestha. Is a Chevening scholar who graduated in Masters in Climate Change and Policy from University of Success. He is a visiting faculty at Kathmandu University and teaches the course of Environmental Law and Policy. Welcome. Third, we'll have Analaya Schlanger dos Santos. Is a young Afro-Brazilian American woman born and raised in North Minnesota. A round of applause. And after living in Atlanta, Georgia, she moved back to Minneapolis to study global relations and environmental justice at the University of Minnesota. And she's joining us as a campaigner from the Shift Us. She might be telling us a little bit about that more later. And last but not least, we had Lois van Dirk. And is the founder of Climate Court, a platform dedicated to providing insights into global climate litigation and legislation. With the firm belief in the power of international collaboration, advocates for connecting key stakeholders across borders, and offers strategic consultation to attorneys handling climate litigation cases. She's working on a project on U.S. Immigration attorneys to set up pathways for climate refugees and environmental defenders. Welcome. All right. So I think I'm gonna stand here so I can see all of you. And first off, I really want to thank you so much for being here. And I wanted to start asking you from your experience, so this is a question for all of you, from your experience, how do you define what is loss, what is damage to you, and how do you experience that in your own context? So we can go from left to right, from right to left. So Casey, do you loss, and how do you define damage in the climate context? And in your, like, loss and damage.
She said loss and damage. I thought she said laws, and I was like, whose laws? Mother Earth's laws, or the laws of these silly humans? Loss and damage, loss and damage. You know, there's so many areas that one could begin to speak of. And first of all, thank you all. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for offering what you offer. Thank you for gathering us all together. And thank you to my daughter and Shannon and our incredible friends back there. Loss and damage has got to have many meanings to each one of us in every situation that we're in right now. When we talk about things for us, for the indigenous peoples, you're sitting on some of the loss and damage. And I honor the Lenape people who were here before us for their loss and for the damage that we do to them every day. For the Ponca people, the loss comes in many other ways. In our contemporary times, the loss is the killing fields of the extractive industry. ConocoPhillips 66 is enacting another form of genocide, an environmental genocide, where I live right now. That's what brings me here. Virtually every Ponca family, after going through the experiences of our histories of forced removals from our traditional territory where the Great Mystery put us, to the smallpox blankets that reduced my tribe to under 200, well, around 200 people, to this time where virtually every single Ponca family has multiple cases of cancers, children not making it to birth, babies being born with brain cancers and bone cancers, our little ones having to carry those inhalers with them and learning how to share with one another if somebody comes to school without one, because the air, the water, the earth is poison where we live right now because of what they're doing there. A huge refinery, a whole tank battery, fracking, injection wells, pipelines, earthquakes, methane gas leaks. And that damages life itself, life in every form, life of those corn people and the sacred trees that breathe for us and feed us, the bushes that carry the berries, their lives are endangered, the sacred bees that you saw there in that little film that means so much to me, the lives of the deer that wander down to the stream that runs through our reservation, through the elder homes, through the Head Start building where we send our 3-year-old babies, to where our senior citizens eat, to where we hold our annual gatherings. The deer come down to take a drink of water in that stream and die. The damage is to the indigenous peoples, our philosophies, our traditions, our religion, our language, our existence on this Mother Earth. the great mystery who made us all, now, though, has guided us so that the damages, and loss and damage also means what's going on in the UN right now. You know, in the 2016 Paris agreements, when they also added in the indigenous people's voice as part of what had to be listened to, not just from that, but from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, where we're guaranteed the right to free, prior, and informed consent. Not consultation, but consent to any new development in our territory. So there was a loss and damage fund that was created that virtually every nation state agreed to put funds into, including what's called the United States, what I called stolen land. And they never have done anything. So for reparations, for folks like us, to be able to even to grow those seeds, we can't grow organic food within a 16-mile radius of our tribal headquarters because everything is so damaged. So loss and damage means it's time for us to adapt. It's time for us to live in post-traumatic growth and wisdom. It's time for us to take back what was stolen in terms of a value system where all living things were viewed as relatives, where we didn't talk about natural resources, we talked about sources of life, where we looked at water as a living relative, as we still do. For us to be able to repair those damages and to fill that loss, we come to places like this. We learn from each other. We stand up as civil society. I'm so proud of one of my grandsons, Sebi, today, because he got arrested when he went to Citibank and said, we're going to call out the people who financed them. We're going to call out the insurance people. We're going to make a switch in consciousness that actually changes the world for the 7 generations to come. We're going to recognize that the ancestors who gave us this way of being, this philosophy, this deep understanding that we're all related, not just humans, as water protectors and land defenders, as lovers of what is nature by developing rights of nature statutes, but to recognize that we are, as humans, we are nature now. We are nature protecting itself. And internalize that and live that way, loss and damage. You know, she wanted to know about our perspective, and I was thinking, you know, my perspective is so much longer than you guys. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Abhishek, do you want to see what loss and damage means to you?
Thank you, Isatis, for inviting me in this panel with a distinguished speaker and with the participants here. So defining loss and damage, I think it gives a great space for us because it's still loss and damage doesn't has that proper definition or like understanding. So I think that's what this discourse can bring to shape what does loss and damage means. So I think what the earlier speaker has already highlighted, like what the loss and damage means for her and the indigenous community. So it's basically for us also, if you see loss and damage, it's about the identity. For us, it's the identity of like cultural, it's about the well-being, because as we have already seen the climate catastrophe, how it has forced people to leave their ancestral land. They are forced to displace because they have been innovating in those lands where they have very spiritual and like different kind of connection. So we have been losing that. So that's a bigger crisis in terms of a loss, and then it's very irreversible because we have seen people are forced to leave their home. People have like died because of these crisis that's being forced to people of global south and also marginalized people from the global north. So it's loss and damage. So is very key for many of the people. In terms of damages, it's something that can be, for instance, we have seen many people who have lost their houses. So that's a loss as well, but it has been damaged, something that can be recovered with finances. But even the finances is there, like people is in kind of shock, like the houses can be like rebuilt, but they have so much of attachment that people cannot get over that. So it's like a part of life for many people when we talk about loss and damage, which like everyone find connected. We have seen many incidents of like climate-induced loss and damage in many parts of the world where like people are like so much traumatized, like they are even in like shock. It's very hard for many people to recover and go back like where they were before. So it's an issue that's very deeply connected with people and the community. So I'd like to describe loss and damage not as in like a climate is there, but I think it's part and parcel of life, where it's like connected with their family, ancestor, their upbringings. So it's part of whole system for the people and the community.
Thank you. I think that's so important, like this aspect of trauma. Recently, like the wildfires in Hawaii, after the wildfire, a lot of the communities were using equestrian therapy to kind of reconnect and reground themselves for the law. So I think like those are super important aspects to bring of this traumatic that communities are facing. And Alaya, do you want to add?
Hello. Hey, I'm Analia. I'm she, her pronouns. I'm from Minneapolis. So in my work with young folks in Minnesota and at the national level and in international spaces, the way I'm describing loss and damage is first to acknowledge that when I hear loss and damage, I think insurance. So it's not insurance. But it's actually enters into the conversation on reparations. So I think that this is harm repair at a global scale is what we're talking about when we say loss and damage. So I think that the mainstream climate movement can understand the damages part of that a little bit easier because it's easier for us to quantify, this amount of houses were lost or this amount of land was shifted from a landslide or the sea level rose to this degree. But I think that loss and damage also gets us into a deeper ask for harms caused to be addressed. So it also looks at loss of income, loss of indigenous lands, loss of indigenous sovereignty, loss of life. You can't put a number on those things. So when the question around reparations comes up, we have a particular understanding of that within the United States, that it goes to indigenous folks and descendants of enslaved peoples, and that is the case. And if we only have a couple years to do everything completely differently, then at a global scale, we need to address harms caused. So I'm saying this in as many spaces as I can. The United States is the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gases, and we are the largest producer of fossil fuels. So we have caused the harm. That does not mean that our peoples and marginalized communities and overburdened communities should be paying the Global South, but if we can allocate trillions of dollars to defense against something that is not attacking us, then we can allocate some money into addressing harms caused. So the way I've been talking about this with pretty much everyone is that we have a responsibility to the Global South that we already signed up to do multiple years ago. We have not done our responsibility. So how can we address harm that goes way beyond numbers and it gets into spiritual harm and spiritual warfare that we're also dealing with that was at the hands of people that came before us. So I think of loss and damage as the beginning of us being able to address harms caused at a global scale, and they can reflect the same way we do that same thing at home as well. So I'll leave it at that.
I'll give more of a climate litigation, climate law perspective. Is that I think if you've heard all three speakers, loss and damage is very personal, it's very traumatic, it's referred to as genocide, even what's happening in the world. But the issue is that with climate law, climate litigation, the legal frameworks, they don't recognize this, what is being described, what is so inherently human, they don't recognize that as loss and damage. It's all very logical, it's all very financial, and there's no proper system to deal with these kinds of losses and damages. And that's very difficult because climate litigation, climate law is really being seen as sort of the last resort that we have. I work in the space, I'm a big fan, but it's so deeply flawed as well that even our last resort is inherently just difficult to deal with. It has these shortcomings that we cannot really solve at the moment, and we should be solving them. So I think for me, loss and damage, if you look at it from a legal perspective, in the climate space, it's really difficult to define because you have the human side and then you have the legal side on the other hand, and at the moment we're not able to balance the both of them. So that's why I think this is really good, because we can try and find solutions. How can we bridge that gap, and how can we make sure that the legal framework starts really addressing what is actually happening in the world, and how can we include these kind of voices when we're writing the laws and when we're putting together the policies? How can you make sure that the real situation is reflected in what you're writing down?
Thank you. So I want to start with Analia. Can you tell us a little bit about the climate reparation camp that you just had and some of the discussions that happened there around this very topic in the intergenerational aspect and all of the intersectionalities of climate reparations?
Hello. Okay, so we just hosted the first U.S. climate reparations camp in the United States in August in Minnesota. It was a lot of work, but it was really, really amazing, and we had some awesome organizers from all over the U.S. between the ages of 19 and 35. Well, really, our eldest was 70. So I'm going to talk just a bit about this thing. So a lot of folks have been really working on reparations in the U.S. for a long time, and I only learned about loss and damage, for example, right before I went to my first COP, the Conference of Parties, 3 years ago. And so my work in Minnesota focuses on training young folks to become community organizers that operate through the lens of environmental justice. So I've started doing more global work and global climate justice efforts in the last couple years. And so in partnership with ActionAid USA, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, Justice is Global, and then the U.S. Fair Shares Collaborative, we just hosted summer camp for adults. So we will be doing it again next year, so come find me if you want to hear more about it. But the main focus of camp, as Isati said, was climate reparations. So we talked about what does it mean to actualize reparations for folks that are marginalized globally, but we also centered on a policy document called the Fair Shares Nationally Determined Contribution. Has anyone in here ever heard of an NDC or a nationally determined contribution? Raise your hand. So it is from my, I'm playing catch up, understanding that a nationally determined contribution is a policy document that governments put forth that say, here's how we're gonna do what we said we're gonna do when it comes to climate. And so there was already a Fair Shares NDC created, I think in 2021, that brought amazing minds together from all over the US and from the Global South to contribute and produce this document that says that here is what our fair share of global climate responsibility is. This led to, or was a part of our commitment to pay the Global South $100 billion a year as of 2020 or yesterday, and we haven't done that yet. So a big part of this camp was talking about what do we need to do within the United States to get us to appropriate this money that we already said we're gonna do, but now we have an updated number. So as the largest historical emitters, we have the Global South has been asking for $5 trillion a year, I think by 2035. I'm not good with numbers, y'all. Okay, you bear with me. And because we haven't committed to that yet, our portion is $446 billion per year. So I'm throwing these very large numbers about. These are numbers that, me personally, I have never dealt with before. But this is our responsibility because of our historical emissions in the United States. So it's a massive number. And we know that our government doesn't really, they say they don't really give out money easily, but they've shown that they do to other countries that are causing harm. That's all I'm gonna say for right now. And so if we can appropriate money in that direction to cause harm globally and continue colonization, we can move some money into our relatives in the Global South who have been asking this for decades. So that was the point of camp. We had 30 organizers from the US take a chance on us. Everyone who attended received a micro grant to continue this work and also to pay them for their time. So we have some representation from Hip Hop Caucus, Sunrise, Interfaith Power and Light, of course. We've got folks from DC, we have people from North Carolina, all over the US and from Mexico as well. So had a really amazing week-long camp in Minnesota and talked about what is our responsibility. And if you can see under my name, I'm a part of the Shift Us campaign, which is launching on Thursday. So if you think of that Fair Shares policy, NDC, that nationally determined contribution, as our policy tool, that is officially out. So you can look up usfairshare.org and you can see the policy document. It's been contributed by Isatis and some other people in here as well. If you think of that NDC as the policy document, that's going to be presented to Congress, and we will be hopefully putting that into the United States' nationally determined contribution that will be due in February. And then we have the Shift Us campaign. So the campaign was also what we talked about at camp. What has to happen internally in the United States for us to actualize the reparations that we say we're supposedly doing at the United Nations, for example. So loss and damage is one of the main programs that we are using to address climate change. So what do we have to do within the US to get us there? And it's gonna take a shift in mentality. That is a huge uphill battle. If anyone in here is an organizer or works in any sort of climate space, you know that it's hard, because we're still arguing about whether or not climate change is real in our country. So come find me if you want to hear more about the Shift Us campaign. We're launching on Thursday evening at 5:30 at St. Bartholomew's Church, and it's in partnership with the local Conference of Youth and the Indigenous Wisdom Keepers delegation. And last thing I'll say is I was just at the local Conference of Youth last weekend where we drafted the National Youth Climate Statement, and Fair Shares and $446 billion is right there in the top line. So I want everyone in here to start getting comfortable with hearing those kinds of numbers. We don't expect that it comes out of y'all's pockets, but it can come out of our country's pockets. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much. And it's very interesting because in the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, it was important for this country that liability wasn't a part of it. So US is not saying that it's doing reparations, and I don't think anytime soon they will say that. But I think that we have commitments, and I think through like US Fair Shares that it's something like an NDC for and by the people, we can see what that should look like. So I want to move on to Casey. And you've seen like firsthand, as you were telling us, some of these very big impacts. And we have heard the powerful call of the land back movement. And I wanted to see, how do you see intersections between land rights and climate reparations as we do it. Both there's like a responsibility from the global north to the global south, but also within countries to like First Nations and like their colonies and other marginalized communities. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's kind of a big order. So you could elect me president. On the first day, I would not drill, baby, drill. I'll tell you that. I do want to address just very quickly, going back to the loss and damage. Of course, they have not, the United States or anybody else, put any money in that fund, nor have they made any concrete path forward once the money is in the fund. They have not made a decision on how it would be dispersed, when it would be dispersed. But one thought is in just transitions. If one just took the amount of money that the subsidies are, that are given to the mass murderers that call themselves the extractive industry, then that money alone could be utilized in a healthy manner, starting at the bottom up. And if you don't mind a quick thought on indigenous just transition, that also has to do with a similar situation with land bank. Land bank doesn't mean that all of Turtle Island or the United States should be returned to the indigenous peoples immediately. What it does mean is that our relationship with the place where we are is important. You know, the Ponca people were removed from what's now called Nebraska. For us, it was Ni-Balaska. That's water that's on the surface of the earth. And our relationship is tight. There are state parks there, for instance. What if instead of the state of Nebraska or Ni-Balaska caretaking that land, what if some Ponca were the caretakers of that land? Our relationship is deep and strong. What if we were the ones to say this would be the appropriate thing to do there when tourists come? Maybe the appropriate foods to grow that would help communities. What if that was the same way for the people in Yellowstone, Glacier, all of the places one can think of that now belong to the United States federal government? What if land back looked a little bit like that? That's one thought. But when we were talking just a moment about a just transition and how money, that fake stuff that's on a card, right? It's not even real. So let's try to imagine and reimagine just like they do, only much quicker, because you guys got your minds and you're capable of doing it faster. What if we reimagine how those plastic cards or the imaginary money was distributed? And so that happened with a young group of indigenous women, the Black Mesa Water Coalition, when Peabody Coal went belly up. It's inevitable that that's going to happen, and I want you all to know that and internalize that as well. It is a finite product that they're all just greedy, greedy, greedy to try to grab their last little bit of it, the extractive industry is. But these young women, when Kobadi went belly up, decided that they would go into a federal court, take it to the Supreme Court, with the idea of what does it mean for a just transition for the money that's being made for those who are trying to get a golden parachute from the top of Peabody Coal and just parachute out with their millions and billions and whatever illions they have and leave everybody else to clean up their mess. These girls said, what if instead we did it from the grassroots up? Starting with how do we do reparations to Earth herself? How do we help her to become healthy after all the harm that this coal company and the water that has been stolen from the river's life for everything's? And let's get beyond human rights. Let's get beyond thinking that it's between humans and the law. It is not. It is life itself, including the life of Mother Earth and all she sustains, and Father Sky and the winds that blow. It is life itself. What if the money that came from Peabody Coal declaring bankruptcy first started with helping the earth to be healthy again, and then from there it went into the workers? What would happen to the workers who were in that coal plant all their lives? How would it work for them to be able to have health money and to be able to feed their families while they have a training through just transition for new jobs? What would it look like if the indigenous lands that had housed Peabody Coal were the first ones to receive a way to repair the land they live on and occupy that land that was taken from them just in that little tiny territory? And if there was anything left over, go ahead, jump out with your parachute and see how far down you can go. You're going to fall real fast, because that's the way just transition should look. And that's the possibility of us, for your young people, to be able to reimagine how you see wealth. Wealth means health. And your health depends on what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, what laws you believe in. I believe in the natural laws. So the Ponca tribe, with the help of Movement Rights and so many others, Global Alliance on the Rights of Nature, have enacted rights of nature statutes saying that all of nature, the fish in this stream, the birds, the deer, and the human, have a right to live in the manner in which the Creator and Mother Earth designed. Rights of the river. The river has rights. The wind has rights. The tornadoes, the hurricanes, the ice, they have rights. Those are natural laws. But you can either deny those and be a climate denier, or you can recognize those by creating a policy and a statute in your own territory that helps you to realign. And that's what I keep always going to, Shannon, is Movement Rights. The little tagline on there is aligning human law with natural law.
Thank you so much. Very, very powerful. Got us thinking of like that power shift, that one of the ways that reparation can be made. I want to move into Abhishek. And Abhishek is one of like our buddies in like the Loss and Damage Fund board. We act as active observers or interim active observers. But you recently had worked in this research about how to assess economic loss and damage after a disaster in Nepal. Can you talk to us more about like where you are with that, what was the process, etc.?
Yeah, thank you, Isatis, for the question. Because I think most of us has been engaged in different way, maybe our academic research or on like social research or action research. So looking into loss and damage research, it's comparatively different than any other research, because while going into the research of loss and damage, we go and ask people who is already having suffering, like, because some of them might have lost their near and dear ones, some might have lost their homes, some might have lost their land, some might have lost their crops. So it's very, what we found is like it's very difficult when we go and ask people how much land did you lose? Like, so like the people, like they try to recover from that incident, but when we go and ask, so it's a bit comparatively challenging than any other form of research, because it gets back them to the shock or like the incident that they had. So what we found is it's comparatively challenging to do loss and damage research, because as I shared earlier, we asked them like questions like what kind of losses that we had, because it's very important as well, because in the loss and damage discourse that we have ultimately is we are calling for global north countries to provide money, finances. So until and unless if we don't have that verified information or data, so these global north countries are not giving resources, as our earlier speaker have already mentioned, that the resources that what they have like committed is even not there. That was for adaptation, like basically for the global south. Now the loss and damage is something that is an additional, so for us. So what we see is like it's a challenging, because ultimately we have to account how much losses were there and how much was damaged. So it has to be more on like finances term, and sometimes like it's like non-economic losses. It's very difficult to account. So in one word, I'd like to say it's comparatively challenging, because people is like very difficult to address and like account what they have, because it's connected with the incident that they have. But despite that, the challenges that most of the community, like indigenous people and the people who are in the front line of this crisis, they have to share, because ultimately our country doesn't has that financial resources that they can support community to recover from those losses and damage. Ultimately, we have to come up with some figures, because that's what that has been put forward. If you see in the climate finance discourse, we were talking about $100 billion per year, but it's hardly like in last 5 years, it's hardly like $15 billion that has been, and then the global north has been leaving the people in our part of the world to die. And now, as I think most of you have been part of that campaign or heard about that campaign, the Pay Up campaign that was part of global solidarity, and now we have been calling like it's like $5 trillion per year that global north owes to global south. So it's a challenging task that has been forced us, that if you don't come up with some numbers, then how do we give that money? So it's a bit challenging. So we have to maybe see in a way, or like find a methodology and approach. I think that's easy for the community, or like the people who have that suffering, or a methodology that can be accounted, so that the resources is the key, because the people are suffering. They are forced to leave their homes, like the cattle that they were raising is no more. So I think what we have realized, it's a bit challenging and tricky, but that what we are forced, that if we don't come up with number, no one is going to give money, the resources to rebuild the houses, to go to the new place, or start some new jobs for the people. So I'd like to end up there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And very important point there, that we have to come up with what are the numbers, what are the methods of, like, what are the best ways to get community access to the fund. So there's a lot that is like asked of the people that just need the help. So, and again, like loss and damage is not charity, it's a responsibility. So we definitely need to like rework the narrative of how these rich nations are looking at the loss and damage fund. I want to go into laws. If you can tell us a little bit from like the legal perspective, what are like strong protocols and mechanisms that can be used for ensuring climate reparations, redress, and compensation?
Right. I would say there's two examples that I would give. The first is from Finland, where they have the only recognized indigenous people from the European Union, which is the Sami people. And what they did is that in their national climate law, so not even their national law, but their national climate law, they said whatever policy we implement, whatever we do, it has to be in line with this, with the policies and the lifestyle and the culture of the Sami people. And that's just words on paper, but what we see now is that they sued the Finnish government, and the Sami people were part of this lawsuit, but it was about human rights, indigenous rights. And what they said there is that because you're violating our climate law, you're not doing enough as a government to protect us as people from climate change. You're also violating the rights of the Sami people. So any violation of the climate inherently means it's a violation of indigenous rights. And I think that that is one of the strongest things that I've seen so far in addressing that issue of reparations. How do you restore what you've damaged? But still, it has its shortcomings, to be honest, which is something that I think if we break out into smaller groups, is something I would really like to hear from other people as well, is how do you make sure that past harm is included when you're looking at these kind of issues? Because climate litigation, climate law, it's always current, future, but never really past. And that's a flaw of the legal system as well, because it's built that way. And even if you try to do it, there's still going to be counter-arguments saying, no, you cannot prosecute, you cannot go after things that happened in the past because it's against our rule of law. And they come up with all of these arguments. So how do we address that? So that's the first example that I think is really good. And then the second one happened recently in the US, in Michigan. And what they did there, it's an environmental justice case. And it was about granting licenses to a waste management facility. And the local authority there, they kept granting these licenses despite the waste that was building up in the ground and the detrimental health effects that it was having on the people that were living there. And the people who were living there, they were predominantly people of color. So they said, this is enough, we're doing something about this. So they filed a lawsuit, and rather than actually going to trial, they entered into a settlement agreement, and that agreement is public. If you want to look it up, it's really interesting to read. So they actually, very similar to Finland, they said in that agreement, from now on, whenever you're granting any license, whenever you're granting any permission for any project, any waste facility, any new company in this area, you have to consider the rights of these people that are living here. You have to consider their health, their future children. And I think that's the second example that I would say is very relevant at the moment, and it's just not happening enough yet. Because with climate litigation, they're always trying to go after these big headlines. They're going after the huge cases, they're built around that, but they're actually, the successes are very small. But that's okay, because these small successes mean that it's a local community that's being helped. And at the moment, that's much more effective than these huge climate litigation cases where they're saying this government has to reduce their emissions by X%, because it's just not happening. It's not being enforced. There's no real remedy. Even if you think we're celebrating a climate litigation win, there's nothing behind it. I don't know if many of you read about, for example, the case in the European Court of Human Rights against Switzerland, where a group of elderly people sued the government as well. They said, the Swiss government, you're not doing enough, and because we are older women, climate change is affecting us disproportionately, it's affecting our health. And actually the European Court of Human Rights, they said, yeah, we agree, their human rights are being violated. And months later, the Swiss government has said, no, we don't really care about this judgment. We're not doing anything about this. We're doing enough. It's fine what we're doing. So now they have to enter into this even longer process of trying to enforce a judgment that was already really costly. It took a lot of time. And that's why I think these quick, small wins are a lot better. And these settlement agreements and trying to combine law and indigenous rights, nature rights, into one, to make sure that you recognize, like what was mentioned earlier as well, you have to recognize that all of these rights are interconnected. It's not just human rights, it's not just nature rights, but you have to combine them into one, and only then you can actually litigate them, only then you can use them and fight them without having to repeatedly try and argue about the intersectionality, but it's already written down. So that's another example that I would use.
Can I add
You
something?
wanted to add?
I'm going to add something really quick. So what I've noticed, I just want to, I think those are great examples. We're not going to fix these systems using the same systems that have caused the harm, period. So my background's in communications and public relations, so I think a necessary part of the rhetoric around how we're going to get money from the global north into the global south comes with the understanding that as the harming entity, or the entity that has driven the harm, caused the harm, it's not for us to decide what the harmed bodies or the peoples are going to do with the money. So I think that are going to do with, you know, the thing that we're doing to help, not help them, it's not charity, but like, this is our responsibility. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance that comes into the process of how we allocate funds, where it comes from, who qualifies, where it goes to. But then we can't allow nuance to be the end of progress on this. We can fight forever about what they're going to do with the money, but that's not for us to decide anymore. So I just wanted to add that in the way that we're framing this.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear, you know, because often people talk about reparations and they think that it should be a financial compensation, but it's great to hear and elevate and see this more holistic view of what that is. And just like to close, right? Like I would like for you to, you know, think about what you think is essential to have if we were going to have a climate reparation framework, what would be essential for it to have, and also end with something that gives you hope. So let's start from Luz.
I would say that for me personally is something that I've been looking at recently is that for me part of reparations is, obviously it's a huge topic, but a small part of it for me is that we have to include the possibility of migration as well. I think it's the last thing that we want is that people are going to have to move, but I think that if and when it might come to that point that climate damage is going to get so bad that people are going to have to get out, we have to try and have established routes for people to actually find. Asylum is not the right word, but it would fall under that framework. For example, in the US, they would have to create a legal route for people to come, and in the European Union, same thing, because now it's non-existent. Whether you're a climate refugee or you're an environmental defender who is being persecuted in their country, it's incredibly difficult for them to get out. So I think if I would have to come up with anything that I think is quite tangible and that we can do and that we can prepare, it would be that.
Analia?
I would say that this is an opportunity for us to do what we say we're about at a global scale. The United States, for example, prioritizes itself as climate champions. We are not. It prioritizes itself as justice champions. Let's be for real. Not here, that's not the case. So I think that this is an opportunity for us not to put our money where our mouth is, but to show the world that we're not only standing in solidarity, but that we're willing and committed to embodying the things that we say we're about. It's come time for that, given the timeline we have and all that's happened so far leading up to this point. I also think that we have opportunity to change the narrative for our communities globally and center relation and community. So communities tend to experience outside entities coming in and telling us what we need, right? That's how colonization and colonialism happen. So I think it's time for us to listen to community, be driven by community, and not work with, but like center and prioritize the things that people are asking and planet is asking. And something that gives me hope is just that we're writing a new timeline right now, and to be a part of that is really exciting, and it's also scary. So especially if you're a young person, find some other folks that you maybe don't know, and build community with them. I think that that's how we're gonna address this, all of these overlapping crises, if you will.
Abhishek?
So it's great to know that you are working on climate reparation framework. So looking forward for that. So what I like to say is climate reparation should not be seen just as a compensation from north to south, but it should be more as a restorative justice for the historical emission that the global north has done. And along with that, the climate finance is not as like an assistance or aid from north to south, but it has to be in form of reparation and the debt from the north to the south.
Thank you.
You know, grandmas and great grandmas just really have a long list of things they want you all to do. So I'm going to try to be a little bit short here. And one thing that I would appreciate is for you to understand that if Indigenous rights are respected and enacted, that means that you as our neighbors and our relatives also are having your children protected. Yeah, it's important. So you can please uphold the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, because within that are the inherent rights of Mother Earth that do exist. And thank you each for all of your examples. You've given me so much to hope for and believe in and know that things are trending in the right direction. I'd also like you to realize the power that you have. You would not be here tonight if you hadn't chosen yourself to be a warrior for the future, a warrior for peace, a warrior for the planet that loves you and is willing to nurture you no matter what. But that means that there is a reciprocal portion of life that you also have to enact. And the next thing I would say is the urgency. The urgency. We've taken a long time of allowing this to happen, and we don't have to. There are very few of those folks, I'm being nice, in political office who call themselves leaders. I look out here and I'm looking at leaders. I'm looking at incredible minds, incredible spirits, incredible abilities to help this change to happen immediately, because it has to be a whole system change. It has to be a shift in the manner in which we look at ourselves as relative to all, not separate from. And one way, one concrete way that we are finding, because we too understand that climate has a right to exist, this time of purification on Earth, she is showing you what natural law is and how she plans on cleaning things up. Yeah. So what do we do? Over 30 countries now have enacted rights of nature laws. Some have it in their constitution. Some individual landowners are using that. Some tribes, like our tribes, are putting that within our statutes. But it lives within each and every one of us to just go to a city meeting, go to sit down at your kitchen table with get everybody involved, and show what true power is. It's not those guys sitting in the UN. It's not the ones who are running for election, except maybe one woman that I kind of like. But I loved what Michelle Obama said when she talked recently. Do something.
Amazing. Thank you all for joining us. This was an amazing conversation that I hope can carry forward. Thank you so much for your time and being here with us. And now we're going to move into a talk. So recently there has been frameworks that have been created, and Mrs. Sonia will be joining us from the Climate Reparation Research Center in Jamaica. I think she is online. And can someone tell me?
So much. I'm
Yes,
joined today
you can.
by Mia McMorris as well.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear us very well?
We can hear you very, very well.
Awesome.
We cannot see you though.
Really?
So that's a cue for our team. So give me 1 second to see if they can pull you up in the screen.
Okay.
But meanwhile, we get her to see her. Oh, there you are.
Okay, fantastic.
Such a beautiful face. Okay, so we're with
Both of
Sonja
us.
and Mia.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. You can take it away.
Okay, greetings, everyone. I want to greet you in the name of my ancestors for this presentation today on the changing climate for reparatory justice. And I know Mia is going to be sharing our PowerPoint, but as she brings that up, I want to begin with an invocation. First of all, thank you all for having us for this presentation. It's really a pleasure to be here. This invitation means a lot to us at the Center for Reparatory Justice, and of course, at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, which recognizes and declares that the land on which we operate as an institution of higher learning is the original or traditional territory of many peoples. The UWI acknowledges the First Nation comprising the indigenous people who were displaced by the Columbus Project and general European colonization, and also the hundreds of Africans who toiled for more than 100 years as enslaved people on the old Papine sugar estate. The UWI recognizes their labor and sacrifices in preserving this land that has enabled the establishment of a university that now provides opportunities for many of their descendants to receive an education that they themselves were denied. These are only some of the names of enslaved Africans on the Mona plantation chosen today as a way to symbolically honor their lives, their work, and their struggles. Frankie, William Bennett, Thomas, James Allen, Coffee, Mono James, Jeannie, Mino, Abba, Phyllis, Queen, Socky, Diligence. Thank you. Now, the Center for Reparation Research is the research arm of the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, Reparation Commission, which oversees and acts as a formal liaison of the Caribbean region for reparatory justice. The CRC published the CARICOM 10-point plan as a development guide for reparation in the region in 2013. This plan details demands for reparation based on the historic legacies of colonialism with which countries of the region have been forced to contend, among them illiteracy, a crumbling healthcare system, a lack of access to our own history, including tangible and intangible cultural heritage, as well as the destruction colonialism wrought on the region. Of course, to people and the land itself, with broader environmental effects which are present today. Within this brief presentation, we center three main questions. What does climate change look like in the Caribbean? How does reparation relate to climate change? And what is the CARICOM 10-point plan? In recent years, the Caribbean has fallen victim to an increasing number of natural disasters, and I know you all are aware of this. As small island developing states and the least contributors to environmental damage and ultimately climate change, Caribbean small islands are among the most vulnerable to climate change. The uptick in hurricanes over the last 3 decades, we had 10 in the 1990s, 25 in the 2000s, 26 in the 2010s, and we are already closing in on 20 in this new decade already. As these hurricanes steadily increase in frequency and magnitude, the prevailing Caribbean myth that hurricanes follow the paths of the trafficking routes that brought our ancestors to this hemisphere in chains comes readily to mind. How we, the descendants, are paying for the crimes committed by our colonizers is one interesting detail. The infrastructure they left behind, in a sense, crumbling under the weight of crimes. There are only, these are only the hurricanes in terms of the statistics. The totals I gave earlier. But there are also tropical storms that impact the region and have been increasing alongside tropical depressions, dumping significant rainfall and wind damage of their own across the region. Both permutations of intense rainfall events lead to flash flooding, which negatively impacts beaches, agricultural and livestock farms, as well as infrastructure such as roadways, bridges, utilities, and drainage systems. Most recently, the damage from major Hurricane Beryl to critical sectors in Jamaica alone is numbered in the Jamaican billions. Moreover, in 2024 rather, Caribbean small island developing states are faced with the reality of a global financial structure which has had a superficial transformation from that which supported the transatlantic slave trade, one which is still not as sympathetic as it should be about carbon emissions, global warming, damage to the ozone layer, and the devastating effects on small island developing states. Over the past 15 years, we have also had droughts. These have become more frequent, prolonged, and extreme in Latin America and the Caribbean. Drought risks are expected to magnify in drier areas such as northeastern Brazil and parts of Central America, the Caribbean, and Mexico, as changing climate and increased population pressures continue to drive rising freshwater demands and reductions in water supplies. At the same time, traditional water-rich areas such as the Amazon are becoming increasingly vulnerable to droughts, as seen recently from the devastating drought of 2023 that left millions of people with failed crops, drinking water shortages, power cuts, and wildfires that threaten the already delicate ecosystem of the Amazon forest. We also have to contend with food security. In the wake of devastating depressions, storms, hurricanes, there's also the issue of food scarcity. The brutal winds and rains impact the growth cycle of many crops. The same can be said for the steadily increasing numbers of droughts and rising temperatures. The growing conditions are no longer as stable as they once were. The soil is also at risk, leading to poor crop yields and in that, a steadily increasing cost, leaving produce not only scarce, but unaffordable. And I now want to hand over to Mia to take it away for the second half of the presentation.
So I guess the question is, how does reparation relate to climate change? And you've all in the panel just before, you spoke a little bit about the modern permutations. But I'm going to start with a timeline. Europeans first arrived in the Caribbean during the 15th century, introducing their ideals and practices to the new settlements. This transformation disrupted the indigenous land practices and disturbed the ecological methods that had previously allowed the land to thrive sustainably. And then we see in the next few centuries, but specifically by the late 17th century, a thriving plantation society. However, this thriving plantation society comes at the loss of the natural ecosystem. In Barbados, one of our Caribbean neighbors, it was believed that by the end of the 17th century, it was basically devoid of forest. And this aligns with sentiments expressed by planters in other colonies who preferred acquiring new land rather than tending to plots that had lost their fertility over time. With emancipation in the 19th century, a land-related challenge arises. Plantations are no longer able to depend on free labor, and there is a heightened demand for smaller land parcels. Furthermore, there's a notable increase in internal migration towards urban city centers. This transition opens up avenues for industrialization, which can, of course, be linked to air quality issues. With the 20th century and globalization, we're seeing a significant change in the Caribbean landscape. There's a rise in industrialization, with manufacturers and entrepreneurs actively pursuing new opportunities for capitalist ventures in the region. And one of our preeminent historians, Eric Williams, has in his book, Capitalism and Slavery. There's one on the screen, but I have a more specific one. From the standpoint of the grower, the greatest effect of slavery lies in the fact that it quickly exhausted the soil. Additionally, the labor supply of low social status, docile and cheap, was maintained in the subjugation only by the systemic degradation and by deliberate efforts to suppress intelligence levels. Rotation of crops and scientific farming were therefore alien to slave societies. As Jefferson wrote of Virginia, we can buy an acre of new land cheaper than we can manure an old one. The planter, in the picturesque nomenclature of the South, is a land killer. With the dramatic change in the approach to land management to achieve the capitalist ideals of the period of enslavement in the colonial period, the Caribbean region was forever changed. The ideals implemented by colonizers have persisted in the management of public resources during the colonial period and after independence. All in all, we are facing a crisis that seems insurmountable. In the Caribbean, we have been working on ways to combat issues of climate change for years. However, we cannot undo the centuries of harm by ourselves. In 2018, Jamaica passed its first plastics ban, and it has been updating it ever since. And yet, according to a study in Nature, Kingston, Jamaica is predicted to be one of the cities reaching the earliest climate departure point between 2023 and 2028. And if you ask anybody in Kingston right now, they'll say that we are having the hottest September in recent time. So with that, I kind of want to do a transition into what modern discussions about reparation are. At the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent this April, 3 points came up in the meeting. I'm going to focus on 2 though. The adverse and destructive effects of climate change are primarily attributed to the historic emissions, economic activities, and consumption patterns of the global north, which disproportionately affect the countries and people in the global south, African and people of African descent in particular. And then number 10, existential gravity of the current climate and ecological crises with their imminent threats of further escalation, the multiplying effects of overlapping crises, transgressing planetary boundaries, and irreversible tipping points. So we're saying that until we get buy-in from the global north, the global south will be at its mercy. So the 10-point plan. As Sonia mentioned earlier in the presentation, the 10-point plan was developed and rolled out in 2013. And as you see in front, we have our 10 points: a full and formal apology, Indigenous people development program, repatriation for those who choose it, and return of cultural heritage, building of cultural institutions, attention to the public health crisis, illiteracy eradication, enhancement of historical and cultural knowledge exchanges, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and last but not least, debt cancellation and compensation return. But I'm going to focus on 4, because you might have noticed that the 10-point plan does not specifically speak to climate change as its own point. And the ideologies of repair detailed with the existing point towards healing our environment and climate, more specifically in items 2, 5, 7, and 9. These items seek to firstly restore existing institutions which support communities and then enhance them. That is, we want to create better and safer environments for people of African descent, Indigenous communities, and the formerly indentured through health, education, and the environment. Then we want to increase access to their heritage, culture, and history. Though through those programs, we can learn more about the indigenous practices around land and soil usages, which allowed our landscapes to flourish. And I'll just run back to that UN Permanent Forum point number 8. Global reparatory and economic justice are critical to comprehensively recognizing and addressing the structural inequalities of the global economy, achieving sustainable development, and global racial equality for people of African descent. The type of justice that the world especially needs is reparatory justice in all its dimensions: inter alia, civil, political, social, economic, climate, environmental, cultural, spiritual, psychological, gender, and sexual orientation, particularly for women of African descent. We have seen the case for economic reparation. The Brattle Report, which was published in 2023 by the US-based Brattle Group, stated that there is 101.4 trillion owed to the descendants of the 19 million Africans kidnapped and transported to the Americas and the Caribbean, and those born into slavery in the form of reparations. And, if you're interested, please feel free to go on the website and look through the figures, because it really does detail every part, and I recognize that we have limited time. But we're talking about the case for climate justice. And I went through a little bit on the points that we have identified, but I just want to conclude with some thoughts. When we consider indigenous cultural perspectives on the earth as a sacred goddess, specifically the rich lore in the region regarding land, water, and other natural phenomena. And I'll just give a few examples. I mentioned earlier hurricanes traversing the same routes as slavers, the myths of the river goddess, such as Mami Water or River Muma, rolling calf, and the tremendous benefits of bush medicine in Jamaica. You will see a tea or a brewed liquid for just about any ailment. If we could get back to honoring these traditions, we may have a fighting chance of turning the tide on repairing our landscape. Indeed, we owe it to our ancestors and successive generations to chart a path of reparatory justice that honors the timeless knowledge around sustainable living, which is threatened by climate change, and for which climate justice is entirely urgent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Oh, I'm in the big screen now. So right now, thank you for being with us, and we have now ice cream for you guys, and then we will be moving into breakouts for those of you that are here and are standing with us, and we want to have 4 breakouts. I think we have a slide on what the breakouts are, and you are going to be assigned by color. The places have changed a little bit. So if your wristband is red or pink, you are in the financial compensation, debt relief, and direct access. If your wristband is yellow or green, then you will be in the land and ecosystem restoration. And if your wristband is orange or beige, then you are in the social and cultural restoration. And finally, if your wristband is blue, it doesn't say, but it's blue, then you are in the acknowledgement and accountability space. So you can go into the foyer, and your facilitators will get you there. They will be waiting for you in the foyer. You can ask Haley questions, the blonde girl, tall one. So she will point you into who is your facilitator, and this is an important conversation. So we're very happy to have you and start having this conversation here, and bring it from the theory to action. So see you back here to discuss what you have found and go and get some ice cream. All right, everyone, welcome back. It's been very lively discussions. So now we want to hear from you guys. If you can sit down. You can, sorry. All right. Okay, I have my 3 facilitators. I need someone from the finance group who wants to share what they talked about. Maybe Analia wants to share from the finance group, or Candy, or both? Both. I heard you say, we both want. I kind of heard like there is so much passion. So let's start with the finance group. And you just have to share, come through, Candy. We just want to like hear what was like the discussion about on the finance group. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hey everyone, hello. We are the representatives of the finance group, and we talked a lot about like what are the limitations if loss and damage and climate finance can go to communities. But like beyond that, we also talked about what does community access to climate finance look like? How do we ensure that direct access to that finance happens? Which is a very difficult and nuanced conversation, but we ended up just having conversation towards the end. So I don't know if you want to just...
Yeah, I mean, not much to add. I think one of the framing conversations was, if we want to think about reparations, do we have to limit ourselves to the framework of the Loss and Damage Fund in and of itself? Because it is a limiting institution embedded in sort of a financial architecture that we can criticize for many different reasons. We also, talked about community access. I think there was a question around like, if we think about reparations, for me, it evokes historical harm. And the Loss and Damage Fund is sort of more of a reactive structure to respond to provide relief, but outside of conversations around grants versus loans, et cetera, especially in the US context, when we think about reparations, we think about sort of legacies of colonialism and other things, and that's not at all captured by the structure of the fund as it stands, especially for people who are sort of descendants of those legacies. So yeah, a lot of competing priorities and complex questions that we have not entirely solved.
That was great. That was our long conversation that went over. Thanks, y'all. Thanks.
In order for them to hear me. Okay, hello. No, it's locked. So I have to come back here. All right. Anyone else wants to share something about the finance group? I'm not sure if I'm seeing, I feel like I'm seeing someone up there. No? Okay, fine. Oh, Gary, come on here. You had your hand up. Come on. Okay, fine. Now we're all shy. So then we'll go to our social and cultural restoration group. Haley.
Hi, everyone. And social and cultural group, I see you out there, so feel free to add or come up here after. We started with a discussion of the CARICOM framework and how not just that, but also for other human rights and climate-related treaties or frameworks, we should be picking what works best for the cultural context and using it to scale or using it as an example, but not necessarily taking everything, because not everything will work in every context, for example. And we had some examples given from countries around the world where some pieces would work, some pieces wouldn't work, and we think there's a cultural shift there in general in the framework making space to be much more flexible and adaptable with things like this, but that this is definitely a useful thing to build from in any context. We also talked about, in order to have real social and cultural restoration, there has to be more than a check. So it can't just be financial restitution. We have to change systems. We talked about human economic, social, and environmental change, not to steal your thunder, and how all of those things need to change and need to be wrapped together into preserving dignity and traditional ways of knowledge, especially as climate change continues to happen. We also talked about how the shift in power that comes with that, and bringing back Indigenous knowledge, restoring it, making sure we're sharing best practices and reteaching things that are being lost. And then we ended on a conversation of real and false solutions, so making sure that we're not taking things that are perpetuating colonialism or colonial thinking today, and how often in 2024, colonialism and neo-colonial practices often look really good, but underneath just reinforce the status quo. So really interrogating things like that, and making sure that we are truly returning power to the people, returning land to the people, and cultural practices, and giving those space in every context. So with that, I will turn it over to anyone else from the social and cultural group who wants to talk.
So Haley really covered everything very well, but I did just want to add that sometimes organizations will say, we want to help, but it's just another way to get in and take more with just the appearance that they're helping. We had the conversation about this building, and I talked about being from New Jersey, how Rutgers University is like a parasite taking over and gentrifying Newark. Are you from Jersey too? Are you from Jersey? Yeah. Oh, you are? Oh, yeah. So you see it. It's scary because they don't care what they do. They're knocking things down, and then they allow the community, the city of Newark, to be gentrified because they'll say, oh, you can be an artist and you'll get artist housing, but they're not really artists. They're faking like it, and they get this subsidized housing that professional people who have been there all their lives can't afford. So it's like programs are created, but they're inauthentic. And we talked about the fact that there's so much more continued white supremacy and white privilege that goes on in the times of where we say we're going to be gentle and, social justice. It's all a farce. And so, too many churches have been compromised after the George W. Bush administration because they've received faith-based funding, and they will sell out the people to get a new car. And it's sad. So we have to get authentic folks, and we talked about writing curriculum and ensuring that the young people and the people of the community really get to learn and not be in places where books are being banned and they're not getting the right education to preserve their own culture. And the demographics of many of our teachers in America are largely white women. And sometimes they may not have the same cultural competence or lived experience for the majority of students who are people of color in this country. So I just had to add that. Thank you.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming. And then we have our acknowledgement and accountability group. Lil is so excited to talk to you about what we did in that group. So take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to do justice to what was said, and I apologize in advance if I was not the most active comprehender. We talked about how it's important as a first step for countries in the global north to make statements about reparations and about loss and damage, but how those statements can be non-binding and have no teeth. We also talked about how the Paris Accord and the UN system writ large doesn't have enforcement power, and how those systems are often based in the countries or influenced by the countries that have perpetrated these problems to begin with, like the UN. And so, what else? Let's see. So I think we kind of talked about how we need to shift away. We also mentioned false solutions and how we need to shift away from things that are not working. And let me jog my. Sorry? Oh, yeah. I'm not cheating. I'm just getting some help. So, and yeah, okay. We also talked about how we need to look to systems outside the UN, not cheating there, and how that pressure from activists and from people in the global south and people that are being affected, how that pressure really needs to be sustained. In order to really hold the feet of these big corporations and big governments and wealthy governments and force them to pay up like they've said they have. So I'm going to stop now before I say anything else. And if anyone else wants to say anything, I'd be happy to let them speak.
Okay. And last but not least, we have our ecosystem and land restoration group. So Alex, come on.
All right, awesome. I also am very much liable to cheat, so nobody call me out on it. All right, so our conversation's really centered around Indigenous land rights, particularly the land back movement was really popular among just both groups that I talked to, and I found something that was really interesting in the first group was that somebody said, ask the communities, not the polluters, and I think that was kind of the underlying theme of our group. In both sessions, we proposed things such as, and just to clarify, everybody was very captured by the idea that it's possible to give back federal state park land to Indigenous groups, and it would be very testable and scalable. So we were really captured by that idea in both groups. It was discussed. So I'm very interested in how much that captivated everybody. But very popular was obviously including Indigenous people in conversations and actually allowing them to take lead, as well as proposing early warning systems for communities globally and locally, as well as transboundary river management, which is becoming an increasing issue not only in the United States, but also in Nepal, and I'm sure in many other areas. And yeah, it was very much focused on what Indigenous communities can offer to ecosystem restoration and preservation, and how we can move forward and make legally binding solutions instead of making these more soft solution proposals. Yeah, if anybody else has anything lovely to say, it was really awesome seeing how much a priority Indigenous land rights were to everyone. So yeah, yay!
All right. Well, that concludes our evening. We're so excited that you stay here for the whole night. This is a start. Like, this is a stepping stone in this conversation. We'll definitely have more. We have been having conversations, like within like the UN spaces, bringing in communities and trying to bring up like what do they think that climate reparations is. So we will be putting together a framework with like initial thoughts and get more information. So we'll share with you and the rest of the attendees, and just keep building on it until we have a framework that is strong enough to like bring these ideas and actions into the reality that we are here. So I'm very happy for all of you, and to see like so many faces that are very, very knowledgeable and active in this space. So to you and all of you that are welcome to join us in this loss and damage climate reparation fight. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening. Should we get a picture of like the people that